A homeowners association can take your house.
You can be up to date on your mortgage, have never missed a loan payment, and still lose your home to foreclosure by your HOA.
So you might be wondering, can an HOA foreclose on your house and take it? Well, we'll talk about that in this video because it's happening to people. Different states, some states in the state of Florida, some of them all across the country, and you will be surprised at how this stuff goes down. I just got done with a video about HOAs and some of the shenanigans about how to fight HOAs and how to deal with them. And just as a guy on YouTube, not an attorney, just a real estate agent that goes through this all the time and has seen HOAs do some pretty terrible stuff. An HOA is a homeowners association that is usually has a board of directors, it's incorporated, it has a set of bylaws or a set of covenants or CCRs that says you can or cannot do these things if you're going to live in this community. They can levy fines against people for not playing by the rules. They are always making new rules, and you either have a love relationship or a hate relationship with them. Sometimes they serve a purpose, and sometimes they can just have some really bad people on the board and make your life a living hell. And in this video, you'll see how they foreclose on people for frivolous amounts of money and how it can be backhanded and how to not let that happen. So let's get right to it. So if you haven't met me, I am Jack. I'm a real estate agent here in the state of Florida. I happen to pull myself up by my bootstraps from zero to millionaire and by flipping real estate and doing all kinds of cool stuff on the internet.
Each month, Karen Gibbons mailed a check for HOA dues on her Gwinnett County condo to the address provided in writing at closing.
See, this is how it starts. It starts with fees that just stack up, accruing this random crazy amount of interest, and then the attorney's fees, and then every time you correspond with them and they send you something back, they charge you for the correspondence. It's just like one of those runaway freight trains, kind of like the IRS, where they start charging you monthly at a 10%, 15%, and it's like, well, I just paid you and now you want more. You might be wondering what triggers a foreclosure from an HOA. Well, usually you fail to pay some type of assessment or some type of fee, or you didn't pay your monthly or yearly dues, and they said we're gonna take that house from you. And if you read in your CCRs or your covenants, bylaws, sometimes hidden in there somewhere is saying that if you don't do this, usually paying them for whatever, that they can do that usually by foreclosing on you. And some states, it can front run a mortgage. I thought that was wild. I didn't think a bank would let that happen, but you know what? I think in the state of New Jersey, it can happen in some other states too. Check your own state, because it's all different in different states. I got to talk kind of generically here on the YouTube channel because there's going to be so many different types of people watching. You just got to know not all states are the same.
But she says she never knew when or if it would be cashed.
It was just random. I mean, there'd be 2, 3, 4, 5 months go in between checks being cashed.
Then out of the blue, she was served with this, a notice of foreclosure by her HOA. With late fees and thousands of dollars in attorney fees, she owed more than $30,000. Did you even know you could be foreclosed on by an HOA?
No, never heard of it.
It's totally insane.
See, most homeowners take this stuff very lightly. They just don't think about it. They don't answer the emails or that random letter you got from the HOA, or they just throw it away in the stack. They don't realize that, yes, in some of these states, HOAs have the right to foreclose on you. Sometimes they can front run the mortgage. And you got to take these things very seriously. And in these cases, it's the reason why I wanted to make this video is to show you that this actually happens to people. Because when I talked about it on the last video, nobody really thought that I was telling the truth. You got to know the rules. You got to make sure you get the proper documentation, because they will do a public notification in the back of the newspaper. A newspaper probably nobody even really reads, but it satisfies what the court wants to do. So like this lady, she got foreclosed on for like $3.24. She just said, you know what, I'm not going to answer the emails, I'm not going to do these things, I'm not going to answer the letters. And they wound up foreclosing on her. See, there's this thought of pay it, then sue us. Can't do it the other way around. I can't say I'm just not going to pay it, because if you read your CCRs and you look at, you know, everything, your deed restrictions or wherever how it may be shaped together, that they do have this authority and they can do this to you. So you got to take it very serious.
It's totally insane.
Trisha Quigley learned it can happen the hard way when her Cherokee County home of 18 years was sold at foreclosure auction on the courthouse steps for about the amount of spare change currently sitting on her coffee table.
It went for $3.25.
Because if you don't pay them, they'll just foreclose on you. And then, like, if you look at it, I mean, odds are somebody in that grapevine is going to wind up picking your house up for nothing. Kickbacks do happen in this stuff. A lot of states are trying to restrict it, like North Carolina is trying to put in laws to restrict this stuff. Florida just came out with the Homeowners Bill of Rights, trying to put some perimeters on what they can and can't do, limiting fines and what they can fine you for, and things that are not in plain view, and all these things. Go watch that video. I linked the details in the description box below in that video. Go check that out. So just check into these things.
Total. She ended up paying more than 10 grand trying to get right with the HOA, but the late fees and the attorney fees kept growing.
You know, I kept thinking, I paid all this money. How come it's not stopping?
A big reason, attorney costs. Every email, every inquiry, every attempt to contest or fix or even pay the overdue bill adds to the bill.
That's a complaint.
By the time Juliette Graham finally sold her downtown Atlanta condo, her HOA bill had reached $250,000.
Remember, if you get hemmed up on these, make sure you know the rules better than them, and make sure that you make them provide documentation. Make sure they provide proper accounting. Make sure you know how correspondence works. Make sure you have an attorney in most of these cases to fight it, because it can get very complicated. And remember, there is not a resume needed to be on some of these HOA boards. They are just somebody that raised their hand and said they would do it. So odds are sometimes the accounting is probably not perfect. The rules are probably not enforced the same across the board. You need to really hone in on these things. And the whole saying, I saw it in the comments on my last video, that if you don't, get involved and you're part of the problem. Well, some people just want to live in the community. They just want to live in their house, and when they come home from work, they just want to go about their business and just be left alone. They don't want a third job, a fourth job of chasing people down and doing all this stuff and writing tickets for grass not being the right size. HOAs have their time and place. I agree, they do have their time and place. But for a lot of people, there's just so many horror stories out there on some of these HOAs. There really needs to be some restrictions on them. I personally believe that an HOA is just like unconstitutional. I mean, you bought the property, you should be able to do what you want to on your property, but in a lot of these areas, well, they disagree with me. They have these rules, and they're just some things we have to deal with.
I can't imagine the mafia having been any worse than what my experience was with this.
It garnished my wages.
He owes $36,000 and counting, predominantly because of weeds in his South Fulton front yard. They were garnishing $600 from his paycheck every 2 weeks until he started the bankruptcy process.
What way do you see out of this? Selling my home?
And I just said, enough. I can't do it anymore.
She paid $34,000 at closing.
See, when you don't pay, they're going to put a lien on your house. And sometimes they'll make you settle the lien, hence foreclosure. And if you don't show up to court, like a lot of people do, it just gets whisked away. And in most states, they got to notify you, or they got to email you, or they got to have a certified letter to your house. But what happens is a lot of people don't keep up with how a lot of legal stuff works, and they just kind of say, oh, I got this letter and I don't know what it means, so I just didn't go. And then all of a sudden they get kicked out of their house. You got to know the ins and outs, and the way to beat the HOA is by knowing the rules better than them and making them play by the rules, like they're making you play by the rules. Just talked about that in my last video. There's a Homeowners Bill of Rights now that's saying, well, you've got to produce to me an XYZ form, email, or by legal letter, or to a legal address that you happen to be in, which would be that address. And you have to provide bookkeeping for me if I request it, so I know exactly what my tally is. So some people say they've been foreclosed on without legal notice. It's possible, or they just buried it in a bunch of other paperwork. Because a lot of times nobody reads the newspapers now, and a lot of courts still think that putting it in the Pensacola News Journal is like actually posting it, when nobody reads the Pensacola News Journal anymore. But 50 years ago, it came out in the paper, and it was on the last page of the newspaper saying, here's the notice for this. Same way like when you do a DBA, you got to publicly announce it in the newspaper, and you got to pay the newspaper. But a lot of people just don't pay attention to it, and they wind up getting foreclosed on. So just make sure you get that weird letter in the mail. Make sure you read it and make sure you understand it. And if you don't know what you're reading, call a lawyer, call somebody that knows. You need to know about some defenses. I talked about them in my last video. You need to, one, when you get a letter, read it. Ask for any type of documentation from the HOA. Make sure they produce the finances. Make sure they produce the bylaws. Read the bylaws. Make sure they're not vaguely written. And make sure you pay and dispute later, okay? Don't pay. It's kind of like when a tenant doesn't pay their landlord, like here in the state of Florida, that even if you're mad at the landlord, you still have to put the money up to the court or the clerk of the court and say, hey, here's my rent every month. But I don't want it to go to the landlord because he hasn't fixed anything. You can't just not pay because the judge is just going to evict you because you didn't pay anything. You have to put the money forward. So that's kind of the way it is with an HOA. Make sure you're paying. Don't just say I'm not going to pay it, because that's what they want you to do. Because in the last, some of the last House bills for Florida made it illegal for an HOA member to get a kickback or a bribe. And I would think that if they took, not a lawyer, if they foreclosed on your house for, you know, $1,000, and Uncle Steve bought your house, and John and through discovery paid the dude on the board X amount of dollars to be able to front run the deal, and he got a kickback, I would call that criminal. And we'll see what the courts have to say about that. We'll see who actually gets prosecuted. But what's cool now is these HOAs have to actually talk to law enforcement, produce the books. They can't play hooky, and we'll find out. A good attorney is going to find out who got the kickback, and felonies going to be handed out like ninja stars, okay? And or misdemeanors. Like, I would think it's cut and dry, because if it's a digital money trail, somebody going down. Make sure there's no inaccurate recordings. Make sure they can produce where they are finding you, because in some states, if it's not produced or accurately given to you within like X amount of weeks, 2 weeks, and then they just wipe the fees clean. You need to know these rules. You need to know if the HOA sat on its duty, and then that's how you get them. You gotta just make them produce so many documents. If the neighborhood went through and made an HOA in their state that makes, you know, that has this document production, they had to produce all these documents all the time, the people running the board would quit. They get tired of printing out and doing all this documents. Because I guarantee you, they, in reverse, record all this stuff, and then they say, oh, by the way, you owe this. Like, on one of the last deals over a palm tree I did, the estoppel letter came at the last minute, and they're like, oh, by the way, you owe $1,000 for this palm tree right before the closing table. It had been there for 30 years. It was there before they built the condos, and it got big enough to touch the fence. Therefore, they said that you owe $1,000 and you got to cut the tree down. I would say, let's look into that. Hold these people accountable. If they're in non-compliance, report them. Report them. If they're doing some crooked, embezzling money, they're not using the bank accounts properly, or there's inaccurate money going back and forth, there's embezzlement going on, report them. And hold their feet to the fire. That's what I got to say about that. And don't forget to like and subscribe, and happen to be a real estate agent here in the state of Florida, on the coast of Alabama, here on the Gulf Coast, Florida, Alabama, and you need to buy or sell real estate, email me down below, and if I don't know how to do it or can't do it, I will find somebody that will, because I can get it done. I'll see you guys in the next video. Email down below your horror story, or good or bad or whatever, of any of these house bills you've read, and for everybody else's knowledge. See you guys later.